Hello and good morning. Do you think street crime and violence are under control in Britain? A lot of people do. But today, on Ronnie and Reggie Krays' 58th birthday, we talk to one of Britain's top police chiefs about why he claims that they kept the streets of London safe. And to members of the Krays gang, who say that modern criminals are dangerous and out of line. Stanley, do you really think that the Krays kept the streets of Britain safe?
Well, not Britain, but within the concept of the East End at that time, then the existence of gangs, you've got to remember it was the 50s, people grew up there, there was an element, you knew where the danger lied, you knew who the criminals were, and you knew who were your enemy. So to that extent, it was much easier, it was less anonymous than it is today.
That made policing easier, you're saying.
Oh, indeed.
That's a different point from saying that the Krays themselves imposed discipline or kept people in order or prevented other kind of crime.
Well, you've got to remember that the psychology of gangs in the East End was that gangs moved for control, they moved for power. And to that extent, they helped keep each other under control. So that perhaps made it easier at times for police to sweep up the pieces and to deal with the issues. But I'm not holding them up as if they're people of great Christian virtue.
But you're saying things were easier for the police in terms of you knew who your enemy were.
Yes.
And also it was easier for other people and the police because the gangs were actually exercising control of their particular territory. They stopped other people getting out of line.
They fought with each other. They also, you knew where the boundaries were in terms of action, and the police knew who to approach. So to that extent, it was basically that people, if you were in a fight, it was like to be in a gang fight or between people who knew each other. And you were not therefore at risk from some anonymous person who would come up and for no reason at all, gratuitously, give you a good hiding.
You're not indulging in a bit of nostalgia
There's
is there?
Oh, there's always nostalgia when you look back, because you couldn't replicate those days today. Perhaps what you need to look at is what was the underlying situation there.
But what I meant by the nostalgia, it's not colouring your judgment and making you see things a bit through kind of rosy-tinted spectacles, and it wasn't quite as
Far from
easy.
it. Far from it. They were villains. And we dealt with them, and people dealt with them as villains.
Tony?
They were dealt with in that way. So I was not holding them up as paragons of virtue.
Tony, did you ever expect to hear a chief constable talk this way
I
about
find
the
that
Krays?
extraordinary. But having said that, I totally agree, because having said that, the Krays themselves, I mean, we get this picture of them as violent, just violent thugs, and there was never like that. And there's a lot of people today who say the same thing. I mean, the Paris sitting here with us today, and he was the arresting officer on our case. Having said that, the Krays did keep control in a lot of ways. I mean, they didn't dish out the violence they were professed to have done. I mean, they get blamed.
You were a member of the Kray gang?
Yes. And having said that, I think they kept a lot of law and order within the East End.
Can you give me examples?
Well, yeah, I mean, if they'd have been out today, I don't think a lot of things that go on now would have gone on.
Such as?
Such as the muggings and all the rest of it. Yeah, that type of stuff.
Tony, you're talking about two hard men, professional criminals,
no, they kept a rule.
Using violence.
No, they weren't the violent thug that people make them out to be. Let's get from the start. They were men who ruled their territories and their areas with a fist of iron. They wouldn't have it. They didn't accept it. I mean, I go to the East End today, and people are genuine about it. They'd like to see them out. People would like to see them out.
What, out of prison?
Out of prison, yeah, well, they should be.
What, back into the East End?
Oh, well, I mean, the choice would be theirs. I mean, obviously...
But why do they want them out?
Because I think people feel, and I'm talking straight down the line, I think people felt a bit secure with them around, and more, not so the other way. I mean, you can...
You know, don't you, Tony, that... I was going to say 90%, I would have thought 100% of the millions of people that are watching us this morning, these very minutes, are saying this is crazy. How can you actually think in terms of professional criminals?
I mean, I've wrote a book about their lives, telling a few of the facts that the public don't know about them. But there's certain newspapers have done things on them and saying about public opinion, polls in it, should they be out? And the overwhelming majority of people are saying yes, they should be out.
We romanticise
I think that's
it.
because they've done a long time in prison. I can't agree with you, Tony, that they kept the East End. So I came up with the East End the same as you, and I think that they kept the kind of business that they were in together. I don't think they kept the business together. If I was mugging an old lady on a sit, there's nothing they could have done about it.
Hang on, Kenny.
I think the fact of the matter is that such people with such a reputation lived in our district.
Yeah, that reputation keeps them at bay.
That existed like that, you know what I mean? And these muggers like to do, and young kids today in post offices, they go in there, watch an old woman, wait a minute, Kenny, right, collecting their pension and that, and they mark her with a chalk, and their mate gets her down the road. I mean, people like that, you know what I mean, they're scum, aren't they? I mean, that wouldn't exist then. But the fact of the matter is that public opinion does...
I think that's a social crime.
Let me make my point, that public opinion does want to get out. And I think where the most sympathy today lies is that there have been over-punishment. And to police an area, from the police's point of view, you can only police by consent, and you've got to earn respect to police. And today the police have got no respect for the public. You know,
the only thing I agree with
them.
what Sir Stanley has said is that I believe in that time in the East End in the 50s and the 60s, there was a kind of Robin Hood syndrome going on, where people wouldn't go out. We thought that elderly people had some sort of authority. I mean, what we did, if somebody was older than us came out of the house and said, get away, we'd go run for our lives. They don't do that anymore. And it's nothing to do with whether the Krays are out or whether they're in. The thing is the social climate today, and I think that Margaret Thatcher has brought in this syndrome of everybody should, as long as you've got money, you're okay. She's got more to answer for than everybody else. She's made a greedy nation out of it. I travel all over the country and I see all different types of people.
This argument seems to suggest that...
You arrested the Krays,
Yes.
Nipper. Have you got a different view of them to what's being expressed
I don't
here?
agree with this at all, because the argument seems to suggest that the Krays were some kind of second-tier responsible police force, that they exercised control in the East End, which is wildly wrong. The only concern that they had was that people that were in their firm were disciplined and controlled, and that's the extent to which they exercised any kind of a responsibility in the East End.
Can I
so
say
far
something,
as
Mr. Rick?
ordinary muggings were concerned,
can I come in here
so
on
far
this?
as ordinary housebreakings were concerned, they've got no control over it at all. If that argument was a responsible argument, it would suggest that the police stations in the East End, Limehouse and Lemon Street and Commercial Street, didn't need to exist because the Krays controlled and contained all the crime, which is not a good argument.
Let me get someone else in.
In the 60s, there was no such word as mugging. Mugging today is a metaphor of robbery with violence.
That's right.
And robbery with violence on an individually in the 60s was a very bad charge. And they went to the assizes and they got a stiff sentence. You know, it just wasn't done.
Why is it? What I'd like to know is that society or general public will accept that crime has gone up tenfold. I mean, I can't ever recall hearing of an 80-year-old woman being bashed over the head and raped in any time in the 50s or 60s when any of the firms were about. Even the old Bill couldn't keep control. Now, what I'm saying is that where we recognise...
Let's turn it. Is that right, Nipper? Is that... Hang on, John, let's test that point, because you're all saying that. There's a what you're saying, in effect, those of you who were around and associated one way or another in the crimes, except for Kenny, you're saying that there's a certain type of criminal who kept a very clear control, there was certain moral code, some things you did do were acceptable. One of the things you didn't do was to mug our 80-year-old ladies and rape, and that didn't happen. Is that right, Nipper?
Well, absolutely. It's right to an extent because
I mean, the police and the villains agreeing.
Yeah, but it was basically true. But let's not put the reasons down that the Krays were doing it for the public good.
No, I'm not doing that. What
Any
I'm saying,
gang was
what I'm
doing
saying
it for
is
its
this.
own good.
What I'm saying is this. Recognise.
Its
Let's recognise what we've got here. Now, I went on a bit of work a few years ago, and I was fronting up as an old Bill. Right, impersonating.
You better explain all this to us. You went on a bit of work. What, you doing a bit of robbing, or?
Yeah.
All right.
I was impersonating a police officer, and I went in and I done the business on. Well, I was going to do the business on this particular face. Yeah, no. Believe it or not, that was before me.
He says you're too small.
Well, you ain't too big, Nick, are you? Let's be fair. Now, anyway, because I happened to have some squirt on me, ammonia, right, and that was basically if it come on top, I could do the biz in the motor. And the dogs don't get me again for the third time. That was mainly what it was. But because I had the squirt on me, it come from attempted burglary to armed, right? Now, all of a sudden, from looking like getting a 4, I now look like getting a double handful for a little bit of ammonia. Now, what I'm saying is that now you've got mugging, okay? Which, let's be fair, let's put the bottom line on it. It's a black man's disease. We didn't have it in the 50s and 60s. Now, I know it sounds racist. It isn't. It is a recognised thing amongst everybody but society, or members of Parliament will not accept that terminology. They don't want to put a stigma and say, no, it's not just... It is a coloured person's disease. They've brought it here, they've exploited it, and it's not, I would say 80%.
People were mugged in Victorian England.
Oh, we're not. We're going way back. We're talking about the crime being out of hand now, and it is.
That's why you get police protection to members of Parliament to leave the House of Commons. That's why the policeman still says who goes home every night.
Yeah, but how the hell can you ask for respect for old people when the members of Parliament don't even respect them?
See, when you talk about muggers, you say, well, they didn't happen when I was young and so on. They always go back about the footpads in the Victorian era. But I'm talking about when I was a teenager, I got put in the first detention centre, then Ballstalls. There was, and I know what the old blokes were for, it was unheard of the type of crimes, as he said, mugging old people or anybody. That's a fact. Unknown.
Are you saying that young criminals are different today, leaving aside the comment about...
They seem to be
with a very good reason. You know. If I may say, with a very, very good reason. Because in those days, I'm not trying to make those days good, but they were professional villains on the whole, and they knew each other. Now today, I'm an old man, and in those days I was a yuppie. I could walk anywhere in the West End, no deal of trouble or anything else at all. Now, if I was an unemployed boy leaving school at 17 with no money, and at the days I want to chase the birds, I haven't got any money to take them out, and I'm on the street corner, I would be a villain. Despite this on the day. Now, I was on with Charlie Richardson when he escaped from prison, and you were talking about the long sentences. Charlie got 25 years, and one of the reasons he came out was we were in Paris, and he was saying to me, if I had gone today into a post office and had shot the woman, I would do 10 years. We were villains. All of our villainy was done against each other. We never endangered the public, and yet I got 25 years compared to...
Come on, they never endangered the public.
No.
All our villainy was against the lady in the post office.
Against each other. This is an argument that has been propounded on many occasions. What is the difference? You know, how do you equate this? Do 3 villains equal 1 respectable and responsible housekeeper, you know, an ordinary person? A murder is a murder, whoever it is. It doesn't matter that it's a villain or not.
Somebody else.
You're not just talking about murder.
You're talking about Reggie Kray.
No, I'm not talking about Reggie Kray. I'm talking about the whole sin. The argument, first of all, that was propounded was that the Krays in some way kept the kettle from boiling over in the East End, and they didn't.
The man had done 27 years in prison. Remission of not a life sentence, it's a 41-year prison sentence. It's inhuman.
That's a different issue. John, are criminals today different? What we say, so the argument here has been that there's hey, come on, you can't have conversations on your own. John, are they different today?
Sort of, yeah.
In what way?
It's not so much big time.
Not so much what?
You know, like, in them days it was gangsters and that. Well, bigger crime. You know, it's small crimes now.
What kind of things have you been involved in?
Yeah, petty theft, car theft, just normal little crimes.
Well, you've been listening to the Chief Constable. You've been listening to other people talking. Do you recognise what he and the other people who remember the Krays and the Richardsons and the East End? Do you think that is different from today? That you've got less that you don't know the difference perhaps between right and wrong so much?
Yeah, a bit. But still, in them days it was, like I say, it was a big crime, you know. Everyone's heard of the Krays and that.
But today it's different. Margaret?
Yeah. Do you go to work?
Yeah.
And would you be a criminal if you had something to do and...
No.
I think that's the point, Kenny.
Absolutely.
It's about a lot of the crime that's going on today is to survive.
Absolutely.
If people haven't got access to nights out, to leisure, and a lot of it is around those issues. Everything's been geared at being cost effective over the years. We're actually living in the 1991s, and every cut that's made is to reduce the services that are given to
Margaret, you're from the Mirrowell estate.
Yeah.
You're saying that a lot of the kind of thing we saw there, or the ram raiders that John knows about and that people like him are involved in, you know, the driving of a big truck through the plate glass window of a shop, loading up with goods, taking it away. You're saying that that's a product of deprivation and poverty.
I mean, I need to say clearly that that is wrong. We know the difference between right and wrong, but it's equally wrong.
Hang on, do we agree on that? We all agree. Young people too all agree on that. Yeah, you do. And they do. Who says no? Anyway, what do you mean no? What do you mean no?
Deprivation.
No, right and wrong. Margaret is saying it's wrong. There's nobody who would defend crime then?
Why not? How else are we going to live? Because no one's going to give us a job. What are we going to do? Go on the
But
dole
that's the
and
point
try
I'm
and live on the dole?
making.
Come on, Margaret.
That it's
I'll
equally
make it right
wrong
there,
to
yeah.
deprive people of the alternatives to crime, and unless we're going to give them opportunities through
Too early,
jobs
maybe.
and through a future, then we can't just condemn them for the crime.
Certainly not.
A lot of youngsters, some of them...
John, hold on, John. John.
I ran a lodging house.
It's a very difficult mob for me to control here this morning, isn't it?
Well, perhaps we could get Reggie and on it.
No. Reggie, I need you at this hour.
No, I ran a lodging house in Nottingham, and I used to sort of lie sometimes to give references to some of the lads that stayed with me. And some of them got jobs, and some of them got damn good jobs. But then they found that it was easier to go and steal a car and take the wheels off and the turbocharger, and they got a couple of £100 for the wheels and the turbocharger. So
you
it
can't
was
condone it,
no, I can't condone it. But I mean, to say that they're deprived of a job, but it's damn silly, because when they get a job, then they pack it in and go back to crime because it's easy.
Well, how long ago was this then? How long,
We're talking about now. Kenny?
No, but I had 49 in 2.5 years, and I should say that the majority of them, I tried very hard, having been in prison myself. I tried very hard to keep them away, to stop them from going back in. But hell, they reoffended and reoffended and reoffended and reoffended. I had one lad in...
Well, what was the reason? What we're asking for? We're trying to see if there is a... Perhaps there isn't. But what we're exploring is whether there is a difference between the kind of criminal culture that existed during the 50s and 60s with the Krays and professional gangs and the young people. What is the difference?
Well, they don't get... the system doesn't punish them. And when they catch them the first time, they let them out again and they reoffend. And they reoffend and reoffend.
No deterrent.
You're agreeing with them, no?
There's no deterrent in this country for any crime at any level. There's no deterrent. There's no deterrent. If anybody in the audience have ever seen anyone have the birch or a cat, I've seen two. I see a boy of 14 and I see an old man that was involved in the riots in Dartmoor. One had the cat and nine tails, one had the birch. And I'm certain half these young criminals today, when they talk about they got no time, I agree that the recession is a bad time. But I'm nearly 70. I lived through a recession. I was brought up in a tough area, in a dock area. But nobody stole. Nobody opened your neighbour's door and stole. And nobody hit your neighbour over the head and stole.
Why didn't they?
Because of iron discipline. We had discipline indoors, we had discipline at school, and we had discipline at work. We were never free of discipline. And that is what's lacking. That is what's lacking today.
Firstly, I want to say...
One at a time.
Firstly, I want to say that people will commit crime, whatever colour of the skin that they've got. And secondly, it's to do with poverty, and maybe it's not lack of discipline and stuff, because people still have discipline. It's just that they've got no money. People
had no money. When I was a teenager, I had no money. Where did I get money from?
Because materialistic things are much more important than they were then. People need to be part of something. Young people need to have friends, and they need to have the same kind of clothes, and they need this kind of sense of belonging, which wasn't as important then as it is now.
We live in
But have you got a still to do that? Have people got a still to do that?
She's making an interesting point, isn't she? She was saying in the days when you remember, and a little bit earlier on that I remember, we didn't have television.
No,
we didn't have all the kind of colour advertisements. We didn't have the martini people put in front of us telling us this is how you should be, life should... We were lived in I was like you, I lived in a very tightly knit working class community, and you all were the same, and there was a moral code and a discipline, and you abided by it. Now they're saying, she's saying that kids are being attracted to, you know, they're being held out the vision of a life that's not theirs, and so they take to crime to get it.
But when you've seen both sides, when you've seen law and order dealt in the late 20s, right through to when the war started, to the late 30s, then after the war, since 1946, when the war finished, till today, law and order's gone out the window.
Kenny, what were you saying?
I was just saying, you were saying about the martini ads and the way people see it, the way that we're supposed to live. We also didn't have leaders in those days that told us that you've got to have money to get on, or you've got to look after number one. The whole climate of this country seems to me to have changed since that gentleman said since the war. That everything is, you look after yourself. We never used to do that. I didn't have any discipline in my house, and I wouldn't go around mugging old ladies or doing anything like that. It's because I knew the difference between right and wrong. I never had people telling me that I've got to go out and earn bundles of money to live.
High-rise council block estates, which is so depressing, and people are forced into people have to commit crime now. They've got nothing. The dole, what is the dole? I mean, it's nothing. How can you survive on the dole? People are homeless.
But 2 million people do.
More
than 2 million. There are 2 million, and there's another 10 or
Most of the
12.
crime comes out of those 2 million.
But what about all the pensioners that survive on less? They don't go out to commit offences, do they?
I mean, but I mean, it's different though because pensioners have got their own community.
They've
got much more. They've got a lot more. They've got their old DHSS.
Wait a minute, I'll tell you now. There's areas in this country, Peckham as well, are no-go areas to old people and women and people like that after a certain time of day. You're telling me these people that you're talking about, these are the crimes that affect society the most that's not been dealt with. The crimes that the Krays committed didn't affect society as much as the crimes that you're talking about. I mean, it's...
Oh, yes, they did.
No, they never.
It
didn't affect society as much as you're talking about muggers and burglars.
You're talking about a pair of murdering bastards, psychopaths.
You don't even know what you're talking about. What I'm saying to you.
You two
wanted to assault people. You're telling me they never affect the crimes that she's talking about is affecting society the most.
But to suggest that the Krays...
Hang on. No-go areas. No-go areas for old women and all that. You're talking about a cobblers, man.
Hey, listen, no, hold on a minute. All of you. Shush. John, I was hoping you would help to impose a bit of discipline here on my bit. Be quiet. Hang on. You've made your point. You've made your point.
No-go areas.
John.
Because of people like that.
Yeah, but to suggest that the Krays kept law and order in the East End because of their...
I'll add it up for you. Stanley, you were going to talk social deprivation. Do you think that is a factor?
Well, it is a factor, but let's remember 2 million people are unemployed at this moment, and of the people who are unemployed, the majority do not commit crime. And the other point...
are living a hell of a life.
Yep, I'm talking about crime.
I bet you most of them come out of that 2 million. Most of the crime comes out of that 2 million.
I think you'll find, hold on, if you look at the amount of crime, no, if you look at the amount of property crime,
law doesn't do anything about.
But Kenny, if you look at the amount of property crime, there's still a lot of it comes, a hell of a lot of it comes from people who are in employment, and also a lot of violent crime. The point I'm trying to make is you don't automatically say because the kid's unemployed, he's going to be a criminal.
No,
he's got a greater risk.
I'm saying he's enforced to be a criminal.
Well,
I'm not saying
no, you make your own decisions, don't you?
Absolutely.
We're big boys. We make our own decisions.
Absolutely.
I know we get pushed down certain ways.
Nowadays, people are deprived. I don't care what anybody says. There are areas where people can't, where old ladies can't.
Why is it then, Kenny, why is it that a lot of people who are deprived, let's take your term deprived, do not commit crime?
Oh, I'm not saying they all do.
And why is it that a lot of crime...
I'm saying the people who are deprived are the ones that are committing the most crime.
But if you're looking only at one issue, I think you're doing a disservice to a lot of people who live on difficult let estates. Let's remember one thing, there's a lot of car crime goes on in which the car is merely used,
for pleasure,
is then thrown away, no profit. Well, so they're not improving their standard.
John?
I think you'd be very careful.
Go on, John.
Look, you've got to have some facts here. I mean, first of all, we know that 90% of crime is economically linked. There's some edge given.
Absolutely.
And the guys who nick cars, they're also nicking the stereos and the spare wheels and all the rest of it. There's another little fact that I want to know. First of all, black people are more a victim of a crime than perpetuators. That's the fact.
Under the criminal justice system.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. Now let's move on. Another thing. This business of fighting fire with fire. I mean, we've heard the corporal punishment stuff, and you're a believer in it because I remember. Well, you said that in the old days that when the birch was around and the cat.
I've never said that at all.
Well,
I have never said that.
No, I know. On this...
We've been on before, John. I've never said that. Let's go back.
Okay, let's go.
Well, let's not go
I'll apologise for that.
Okay.
But
Stanley says he doesn't believe in it.
A lot of people believe in
that.
But any professional criminal is very proud to have been sort of beaten up and not caved in. I mean, it's a sort of like a badge of courage. So let's get rid of that.
Well,
and I know many heavy-duty criminals who've had the cat and the birch, and they walk around as if it's a sort of badge of honour. So don't think that heavy-duty criminals are going to be deterred by corporal punishment.
Not all of them.
And you also know that there's a lot of rough justice around. Not so much now as there used to be, but the police used to give out their own physical violence, particularly in the East End. But now let's go on to the other point. Another fact that everyone's forgotten about. What's changed the climate of crime now? So much of the the street crime that we see around, particularly with cars and burglary, is drug-fed. Now, that's the difference, which you didn't have in the 50s and 60s. Now, what you've got is the organised criminals are much more involved, not so much in protection rackets and robbery. They are involved now in the supply and distribution of drugs. Now, that produces a knock-on effect amongst the underclass. Let's face it, there's an underclass in all our inner cities who are heavily involved in street crime. And it's street crime to feed drugs that are taken in leisure.
You're generalising
I
again.
know I'm
because
generalising,
you're
but
generalising the
I'm
very
also
thing you
correct.
attacked me on. Let us remember the majority of crime in this country is still not related to drugs in terms of theft of property to acquire drugs. Is it? How do you come by that
Well,
nonsense?
the figures in America are 80%.
Are they?
It's
They're
very,
down to
very
60.
No,
They're
they're
down to
80% of crime,
Okay.
drug-related
Get
in the
up-to-date
States.
figures
I
on
would
America,
think
it's down to
Can't
60.
both talk at once, you two.
It's down to 60, and the latest figures, both New York, Washington and Houston, their murders by gun are now 60% non-drug related. So that's very important.
Why is crime different?
Well, I'm a licensee in Bethnal Green Road, and you're talking rubbish.
Thank you.
I'm straight on the front. I'm a licensee. I got the police on my back. I'm talking to criminals all day. They come in, they flog. They're there for one thing, to survive. They steal to survive.
That's true.
I'm a licensee. I've got people around me. I have them people around me to survive. And that's where the problem starts.
Well,
you
you mean
survive.
you need the income that comes from the selling of stolen goods in order to buy the booze that you
They are.
sell?
No, no, I'm not involved in it.
No, I know, but you're...
to survive.
What you're saying?
You made the point. What you're saying is you survive because the people who sell buy
And that's
stuff.
it. There's no in the
But
middle.
hold on.
There's no in the middle. There's no saying there's no work. People do it to survive.
So in effect, if everyone was in employment, we wouldn't have crime in this country. Is that what you're saying?
Of course you would.
Of course you would. Well, let's remember that, you know.
But different type of... You'd have
What do you
these
have?
guys type of crime, which was I don't agree with, but I don't condemn.
Would you prefer it?
Of course I would.
I mean,
You prefer it?
Mr. John Masterman, 17 years armed robbery John did, and Johnny's saying that when the kind of things that he was involved in, or the Krays and the Richardsons were involved in, whilst nobody would necessarily condone or defend or apologise for, was more acceptable in terms of its impact upon society. This is Stanley's point, impact upon society, because it didn't involve so many people or the mass of people. You weren't afraid perhaps to walk around at night.
That is organised crime. That is organised crime. That is completely different to crime on the streets.
Right.
Completely different. They do what they do between themselves. They do their work between themselves, and that's it. That's
The Krays never hurt anyone, apart from the villains. Remember that. No one is a member of the public was run by the Krays.
Is that true?
That is a fact. That is a fact. No, that is a fact. No.
Okay. We're not going to go back all over the case again. What our friends have been saying here is that we're looking for why young people commit offences, crimes now. Is it because you're from the Meadowell estate, you're associated with it? Is it because you think they are deprived and they're out of work and they need to get and I'm talking to you too, Barbara, of course, to get the money in order to survive, like our publican from the East End was talking about? Or is there an element where there's a thrill?
It is the deprivation. We live amongst it. We live on Meadowell Estate and we know what we're talking about. It breaks your heart to see some of these young kids. I don't condone the crimes they commit, but I'm with them all the way. They had all on our estate, all the resources taken away from them. They have nowhere to go. When we had walls where they used to sit on walls, they were taken away. They moved from place to place. And also what I am very angry about is the attitude of the police. They class our estate as Scumsville, Pigsville, Vietnam, the Bronx. Now, there's a lot of decent people on Meadowell, and I'll always defend them. And we love the young lads. We tell them off, and we can pull them up. But some of the things that's done to them really makes me angry. Now, our estate has been isolated a lot. When the police should have been on that estate, they were never there. And if they did come, it was an hour after. Now, I have to defend that. And
You have to condemn that. You mean, not defend.
condemn, I'm sorry.
That's all right, my love.
Condemn that. And there's lots of things. We live on Meadowell and we know what goes on.
No, it's somebody else. No.
I'm going back to the 1920s, 1930s. My father was a police sergeant, and we were brought up strictly by the rules, the do's and the don'ts, and that lives with you for the rest of your life. We were poor, always very poor. But when I compare the poor that we were to the poverty that is on Meadowell, we were rich. The poverty on Meadowell is atrocious. People listen, they condemn people, but it's not...
So you're agreeing with this? Again, it's the poverty that leads people
Poverty
into
and
crime.
deprivation.
But how do you answer Stanley's point, or Kenny Lynch's, when he says, but not everybody who's poor, or even our friend at the back there who talked about the 30s and the docks, that people, not because they're poor, don't always turn to crime.
The youngsters turn to crime because most of them, when they're 16 until they're 18, don't get a single penny. They've got no pocket money, they get no dole, they get nothing. And they've got to have clothes, they've got to have all the things that everybody else has.
Go on.
Nearly 90%.
Because of, like, the poverty on the estate. Like,
is that the excuse, though? It's easy to say that, then, in the end, isn't it? It's easy to justify it by turning around and saying, but I'm poor, I'm deprived, I'm misunderstood, and you might be all of those things, but isn't that a cop-out?
no, not really.
There's no element where people are doing it. See, I remember the interviews that Stanley was on during the Meadowell estate, and I remember a lot of young people, perhaps they were just doing it for the cameras and for television and being a bit gung-ho, but I heard them saying it was exciting, it was thrilling, it was breaking the monotony of their humdrum, miserable life. That doesn't talk about poverty or it talks about poverty of spirit, perhaps, or a poverty
It's a
of...
sad state of affairs when that's what brings excitement to the young people, because they're not going to get out to work, they're not going to meet people, they're not going to get the opportunities of sitting here today. They're actually tied and trapped, and we have to untrap that. Regarding the police, I mean, I have to say that the only time our young people see the police is when there's trouble. Police ought to be part of people's lives, and we ought to see them at good times as well as bad times.
I just like to say one thing. When you're living in a country, when the Archbishop of Canterbury says that there's a social imbalance, and MPs say that he's mad, and I think we're in big trouble.
Stanley, the policing.
Couple of points. Can we clear up part of Meadowell? The majority of people on Meadowell estate are very, very good people, and a lot of people complain. Quite often the term is used, and it was certainly used during the Troubles there, within the media, not by police, in terms of how it was described. And there is a problem when you live on an estate which has got a name.
Well, why were we trapped like
undeservedly.
Huh? We were trapped like scummen. So, you can't really say that, like...
No, hang on, go on, Stanley.
Well, the point I'm taking is that
he says, why were they treated like scum?
How were you treated like scum?
Because we were. You sit on Moorsman, and the riot squad used to come along and say, shift, how you get this?
Yes, I do.
Nice big truncheon.
Yeah.
Would you like one of them across your head?
No.
Well, then?
That should not have happened. That should not have happened. There was, in fact...
Women and kids were getting attacked.
There was, in fact...
Women and kids were getting attacked off the riot squad, and there's no need for that. None whatsoever.
Well, there you've got the Chief Constable, your Chief Constable, he's accountable.
Was at the time,
Was at the
now.
time, all right.
Yep.
But you're the authority figure,
Yep.
Stanley, you know that.
Yep.
And we pay for him. He's there, he's your servant, not your master. Talk to him. What is it he, representing the police and authority, didn't do or did wrong that you want to change?
Didn't police the estate. We never saw a policeman on the estate until the riots.
But hold on, I was told
the
by
nature
the
of
young
policing
man that
changed?
before that there was a riot
But
squad
not
there.
mutually incompatible, though, are they? You can have both.
The basic issue, there was policemen allocated to the areas there from North Shields, from North Tyneside.
They didn't come.
But of course, you also remember you lost a lot of other services on that estate,
That's right.
didn't you?
So therefore you need more policemen.
And this is why we tried to do it. We've been trying to fill in there for shortcomings at
Mr.
times.
Stanley, with respect, I must say to you that we had no policemen. You'd say the odd car fly around the main streets. We never had foot patrol on Meadowell, and I've lived there 10 years, and I can count on one hand how many times I saw one policeman.
So if the nature of our crime and our criminals has changed, has the nature of our policing also changed?
Without a doubt, yes.
Yes.
10 years ago, I would have said and opened a paper and thought if someone got in prison, got a prison sentence, that they deserved it. I believed that we had a really good police service. That was because I'd never had any dealings with the police. Now, since then, I've had a young man, one of my sons who was in trouble, and I've been threatened. with nothing but discourtesy and been blamed for the problems that I've had with him. Yet I have another 4 who've never been in trouble, but I was constantly blamed. If you were a good parent, then that wouldn't have happened. And I have to take some of that blame. I don't say that, I'm not completely
when the
blameless.
twins were about, there were a lot of policemen on the beat in them days.
Is that, well, that's what
we knew.
There was more police stations.
We knew police, yes, we knew policemen.
We had a police station.
We don't know any of them now.
Is that, do you feel, in general terms, that the nature of policing has changed, that they're more inefficient now than they used to be?
Now, the changes in us. In those old days, the average person who didn't come across criminals thought the police were straight. They were wrong, but they thought they were straight. Now it's generally accepted by all youth that the police are more racist than even the ordinary community, and that they're rougher than ordinary community. But I think when we're looking for the reason, a gentleman there was talking about this wonderful discipline and talking of it. It's not discipline, it's examples. We all had heroes. What have we been taught in the last decade? The only people we should admire are people who buy businesses and throw everybody out of work. People who look after themselves. We have preached greed, and we are now reaping exactly what we have sown.
I think it's very important that this should be said. In spite of what people may think, you've got ex-police officers. The fact is that you have got many police officers that are sadistic and brutal, and they brutalise a lot of people, a lot of youngsters, especially coloured kids. But you don't see them doing it on the television and in the papers.
That this helps to create the
it makes
problem.
Makes them antisocial, makes them bitter and hate and full of hate. Yeah. And all this beating people won't do any good whatsoever.
Are they? We talked a lot about black people, racism, and the police force.
Yes, I'm talking on what have been said about the police brutality, their mannerism, and their behavior. They are racist, and I'm speaking from experience. And you are a retired policeman, and when I finish, I'll put a little touch to that. My husband didn't want to come on the program this morning. He suffers with a heart, and he was thrown across the garden path like a bag of potatoes. Before I could look to see where he fell, I was hitting my head with a baton, and I had 5 stitches in my own house, right? There are other things I would like to bring. I'm so glad to be on this program this morning. I would like to throw the whole light out, but I'm treading on a narrow trail this morning for some reasons. Now, what happened that night in my little house where I lived for 32 years? You as a retired policeman, if you were still in the force and you witnessed what I saw, what I undergo, and what my neighbors saw, you would have taken off your uniform and burned it, never to wear another policeman.
No, I'd come back at that. I cannot condone, no way can anyone condone that sort of action if it happened, and I'm assuming it happened by a policeman. But it's not a question of taking off the uniform. There are bad people in any organisation. And it's really a question of making sure that they're rooted out.
Is there an element in which the kind of things people are talking about here, the inadequacies of the police, contributing to the change in the nature of crime and making it more widespread or a greater impact upon society?
Remember, crime's gone up tenfold since the war. Let us all, hold on, madam. Let us also remember, yes, there's unemployment. Let us also remember that the police service tends to pick up most of the problems that the other elements of society fail to address. If there's any truth, and there can be some truth in elements of deprivation, of unemployment, social service, all of these, then in fact the police tend to pick up because they have to deal with the issue as it occurs.
Is the nature of crime, we've talked about the nature of crime and criminals as they used to be, and as they are now with young people. Is it changing, crime? What's the future hold for us, do you think?
Well, my particular speciality is I work in Chinatown with the Chinese gangs, and I mean, they certainly operate in similar ways to what we've been hearing about this morning. The main thing they do is they concentrate their activities purely on the Chinese community. They're looking for ways to sort of come out into the English community, but at the moment they're confined within the community of the Chinese.
What is that going to make it? So that's very much like the kind of Krays and the Richardsons in a sense.
Well, they pick on innocent sort of Chinese people. I mean, the 1% of the Chinese community victimises 99% of the Chinese community.
What difference is that? Is that the policing of that the same kind of thing? Do you take the same attitude as Stanley does? That in a sense it's easier to control. I mean, it might be more pervasive within that community, but at least it's kind of clearly identifiable.
Well, it's taken years really to actually get to understand it fully, to actually work out how the gangs operate. It's a particularly cultural thing to the Chinese.
Right.
I mean, the threats aren't overt, it's all done by innuendo and implication.
And it's more of a closed system, but it's related to the Chinese community, so we're not kind of aware of it here as we might otherwise have been.
Well, that's right. On the face of it, Chinatown's a very peaceful place, but just beneath the surface, it's a really hotbed of crime.
But since the Krays, you've never heard no more 30-year sentences, and yet some of the crimes that have been committed since the Krays and the Richardses have been away is their crime was nothing in comparison to what's been going down now. You never hear no 30 years and any sentences like that.
Is the nature of crime going to change? What kind of things should we be thinking of, looking forward to? That's not quite the right word.
Well, international organised crime is now a major. It has been a major problem for many years. I think the British have not suffered from it as much as other countries, but the Chinese gangs are now becoming an ethnic group which in many places are more powerful than the mafia. They've concentrated in New York and other major cities in New York, the FBI particularly, against the mafia, and they've brought them down. They've brought major gang leaders down, and as a result of that, there is a certain amount of anarchy within the criminal fraternity now, particularly within organised crime. Emerging groups such as the Jamaican posses, the Chinese gangs, and the Hispanic groups, which are based mainly on drug dealing.
And all these are in Britain,
Well, yes, all of them have got some sort of representation here. There is a sort of international network of criminals which operate on an association basis. I don't think that the mafia runs anything in Britain, but the mafia has contacts with criminals in Britain. I mean, talking about the Krays...
Just so our viewers heard, he said, yes, the mafia said, doesn't exist in Britain. Yes, they do. He said, it's the Tory party. Well, he said, I don't know about the process of association. Do you think very quickly, Stanley, that we're likely to have more crime because as our society becomes, picking up Kenny's point, more materialistic, more greed, people that have more ambition, desire more, is that likely to lead on the arguments?
This is certainly the predictions worldwide, that basically within cities, within urban areas, there's going to be an escalation of crime and possibly disorder. But that's a prediction. And so therefore people have to work to avoid that becoming true.
How do we avoid it?
We avoid it, I think, by, first of all, identifying and reducing the level of criminality. Let's remember that the majority of people used to offend once or twice and grow out the system. Now you've got kids, 100 and 200 crimes and nothing. And so therefore I think we've got to look and find out how we can reduce that.
And we have to end on time, unfortunately. See you in the morning. Thank you.